Awakened Living is a 21st century movement for people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious, who have a deep hunger for connected community and a divine impulse for personal and global transformation. Our mission is to encourage and inspire the awakening of human consciousness. Good evening and welcome to Awakened Living Television. My name is TJ Woodward. I'm the Minister and Spiritual Director of Awakened Living in San Francisco. It is my honor to welcome you to our show this evening. I'm really excited about this evening's show. We have Melissa Stevenson with us this evening. She is the Director of Foundation's Intensive Outpatient Program here in San Francisco. And I want to begin by saying, with complete transparency, she and I work together. I am part of the team at Foundations, and I am so grateful, really grateful for the work that I get to do at Foundation's Intensive Outpatient Program, and even more than that, the work that we're doing in helping people walk through their addiction and live a really fulfilling, more open-hearted, loving life. And I'm just feeling very grateful for this particular moment that Melissa has agreed to come on the show and have a conversation, what we're going to talk about. And for those of you who have watched the show, my intention is not to be really tied too closely to a topic, but to introduce a broad topic and then trust the moment and allow the conversation to go where it will. In creating Awakened Living Television, it was my intention not to have a traditional talk show where I bring on an expert and I ask the questions and they answer, but really to be in conversation about spirituality in the 21st century. So each week we bring on a guest from a wide array of life experience and have a conversation about what spirituality means to them or the work they're doing in a spiritual field. So what we're going to talk about loosely is spirituality and addiction and spirituality and recovery and how they're all interwoven. So I'm really grateful to have Melissa here this evening with us. Melissa, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I want to start by saying how much I appreciate you and the love that you bring to this work and your heart that you bring to Foundations and to the work that we get to do with clients. Right. And so I want to start just by setting the tone of gratitude for you and what you bring.
Well, thank you, TJ.
Yeah.
That's very nice of you to say.
Thank you. And so before we begin the conversation, why don't you take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our viewers, and you can tell them a little bit about yourself and about Foundations and the work we do.
All right. Well, my name is Melissa Stevenson, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am originally from Northern California. I grew up on a ranch up there and found my way down to San Diego for college and stayed down there for quite some time. Loved the beach and the weather down there. And then recently have relocated back up to the Bay Area and have been privileged enough to work at Foundations Recovery Network in San Francisco.
Okay, so let's get into this conversation, and it's very broad. So I guess to begin with, how did you get into, or what drew you to working in the field of addiction recovery?
Right. Well, growing up, I told you I grew up on a ranch, and with that, many of the people in my family struggled with addiction and struggled with a lot of social anxiety. So from a very young age, I saw pretty much it was everyone but my mom and her brother really struggling with substance abuse, and it made a deep impression on me. Being really little and seeing my grandma really want to quit smoking but not have the tools to be able to do that, to the point where she named these last two cigarettes my name and my brother's name to try to keep herself from smoking them. Seeing my grandpa really struggle with alcoholism, and to the point where it was killing him, and it was such a struggle for him to be able to stop. And it was really clear to me, even back then, that if someone just wanted to stop, it wasn't that simple to be able to stop. There needed to be outside help. I think also with my family, there was, like I said, a lot of social anxiety, which meant that we didn't talk about things that I think needed to get talked about. So I don't think there's a coincidence that I picked a profession where for a living I help people talk about those really kind of uncomfortable, very sensitive topics on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for that. And I guess one thing that stood out to me is the idea of how much addiction impacts loved ones and families. And I mean, I know working in this field now for many years, the impact that it has both for the addict, the person that's working with or living through, I guess, an addiction, and then all the people around. And of course, it's fascinating then that you've chosen this field, and you know that really is the biggest blessing, right? And that's a very similar story to mine, that through my own addiction early in life, in my late teens and when I turned 20, working with that has then given me this sense of purpose to helping others with that. And I know that one conversation that you and I have recently had that I would love to explore, if you're willing to talk about it, is this idea about a balanced life. And I know that a lot of people use the term balanced, and it's almost become one of those buzzwords of the lately in the recovery movement. But you have this beautiful analogy about the car. Remember the one? If you'd be willing to share that, because I think it's really poignant.
Oh, absolutely. So if we look at a person like you would a car, so what is a car made of? It has tires, and it has an engine, and a cab that you drive in, and a steering wheel that you drive it. But the essential part is, if your tires are different sizes, or if you have a flat or something like that, you can't keep driving the car. It will crash, or you're going to end up stranded on the side of the freeway. So, anyone who knows how to drive knows that it's really important to get the same size tires on your car and to have them all inflated to the same air pressure. As human beings, in relationship with other human beings, it's very similar. So if we use this car analogy for a person, so the tires would be, one tire would be a sense of self, the next tire would be a sense of purpose in life, like a career or whatever makes you feel like you're fulfilled and you're giving back to humanity or something. And then another tire being social well-being and having fun and having a social support network. And then the last tire, what was the last tire? Spirituality. I can't believe, here of all places, I forgot to mention that one. So all four of these tires are integral in someone being a healthy person that can connect with themselves and other people. And when you have one tire that gets out of whack, that gets much more built up than the others, or you have one that's being really neglected, pretty soon you're going to crash your life. And that's how some people find themselves in the midst of an addiction. Other people may find themselves in the midst of struggling with mental illness, like depression or anxiety or something like that. And then others may just find themselves feeling really unhappy and bored and unfulfilled.
Wow. Well, I would love to, of course, the piece that the tire, if you will, that stands out is the spirituality one. But then the other one that stood out to me is sense of self. So we can go both of those directions, but I wanted to start by asking you if you'd be willing to talk about maybe the difference between spirituality and religion, because I know the recovery movement as a movement has evolved so much, and in a way it's changing so rapidly. One piece that I feel like I'm grateful for, because I'm, do spiritual care at Foundations outpatient, is that this spirituality piece is being recognized as such an important part. We might call it mindfulness. I like to call it authenticity or spirituality. But often I think people believe or understand spirituality to be religion. And I wonder if you'd be willing to speak a little bit about what you see as the difference, and then how spirituality plays a role in recovery.
So off the top of my head, the analogy that comes to mind is Christmas. Whether you believe in Christmas or not, most people in the Western world are familiar with the holiday. So for Santa Claus, there's the ritual of Christmas. So your family may do gift giving. They may have a Christmas tree. You may have a certain thing that you eat for dinner. Those are what we would call rituals that go along with Christmas. And then there's the spirit of Christmas, which is giving to other people, thinking of others ahead of yourself, really enjoying someone else getting a sense of pleasure from you giving them something. And I would say that's more the faith part of it, or the spirituality part of it. So there's a big difference between what's the ritual and where's the love. And I would apply that analogy to religion, in that religion has a place in that it gives us an opportunity to have rituals that we do to celebrate or to atone or whatever suits you. And then there's spirituality, which is really about the love and the faith and the intangible thing.
Yeah, and how the two of them can be interrelated, and sometimes they're not. I mean, I know people that consider themselves very spiritual but don't have a sense of religion, for example. And in the recovery world, and I know what we do at Foundations is we really look at that spirituality piece that's not about religion at all. So people, whatever someone believes in terms of their religion, obviously we honor their path, but what we work with is that sense of love, is that sense of heart. And I would love to just open up a conversation about what role that plays in someone's addiction and recovery in particular. Really either one, but in terms of being out of balance, and how spirituality or open-heartedness or presence or mindfulness plays a role in both someone being in an addiction and then in recovery.
So if we look at the tires on the car, if we go back to that analogy, if one of the tires is having a sense of self and one of the tires is having a sense of spirituality, it's really hard to have a sense of spirituality if you don't know who you are. And if you've been spending so much time numbing yourself out by a behavior or a substance or a relationship, whatever it is, it becomes tricky. So I would say, like in my own life, to go back a little bit to my story, when I was growing up, around the age of 9, between 9 and 8th grade, I had a series of really, really big losses in my family. And one happened to be a death, and one was more of the person's still alive, but the relationship is very, very fractured compared to what it was. So in that time in my life, I really realized the difference between faith and religion. And faith saved me. And faith came in and really soothed me and gave me a purpose and gave me a sense of reassurance that I didn't have in any other realm in my life. And it had nothing to do with religion. It wasn't about saying a certain number of prayers every day or going to a building with other people. It was very much this personal sense of having a relationship with an intangible being outside of myself that I felt was supportive and loving. And that made the whole difference for me, and it changed the trajectory of my entire life. So if we go back to the car, spirituality, sense of self, it's hard to have a career that's fulfilling if you don't know who you are. It's hard to have relationships that are fulfilling if you don't know who you are and you can't set boundaries and you can't say no. It's hard to really do much if you're not attending to all of them. But I think that spirituality is like the root of it, because on some level, I think all of us want to believe that we're lovable, and we're not always surrounded by people in our life that treat us like we're lovable. And that doesn't mean we're not lovable. So I think spirituality is a huge component in recovery and in maturity and in having a healthy, balanced life. I think it plays into, I think it's a safe place to find out who you are and really be able to sit with what are the parts about me that I really like and what are the parts about me that I really don't, and feel loved and accepted in the midst of doing that.
Yeah, and you touched on something that to me is at the root of addiction, and that is this sense of separation and those core false beliefs that we pick up. And I know you and I know in the work that we do with clients, so often we can get to that point where they recognize that deep, really it's a maladaptive, it's not a true belief, but it's a false belief that was created by either hearing it repeatedly or some sort of sense of separation. And to me, that's ultimately spirituality, that there's a sense of separation and then some kind of decision that comes from that, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And so many clients that I work with in my private practice and in work with people in recovery is getting down to that core belief that isn't true, that core lie, I guess we could say. So once we get to that, I find that there's a powerful shift, but I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about, in maybe working individually with clients, what happens when they get to that, and then what do you do? Because there's a rebuilding then from that point.
As you were talking, the saying that came to my mind was, shame is the cancer of the soul. And cancer, 20 years ago, had a death sentence attached to it. And there's been a lot of progress made in the medical realm of treating cancer by now. But this idea of shame, most people don't talk out loud about the things they're most shameful of. I think there's been some powerful photography projects in the recent years about taking pictures of people that have a saying or something written on their hand of like the secret that they're trying to hide. I'm thinking of the song Dirty Little Secret right now was all about that. I think that what happens, whether it be at foundations or the people that I see individually, people you see individually, is I create a space for someone to be able to come and talk to me about the things that maybe not that they feel most shameful about right off, but things that they don't want other people to know because they're really afraid they're going to be judged. And quite frankly, they're judging themselves incredibly harshly.
Yeah.
So my job is not to come in and be the judge and make everything right and make it all fair, even it out or anything like that. My job is to come in and be loving and create a safe space where someone can come and start looking at the different aspects of themselves and start re-narrating a new story. I think that when you go back to the comment that you made about the lie that people tell themselves, I think that as human beings, we do terrible things to other people. We do terrible things to ourselves. It's, I think, kind of in our nature. And then we feel terribly about that, and then enter shame. And then that lie of, I'm not good enough, I'm not really lovable. If someone really knew the truth about me, they would think very differently about me. They wouldn't love me. I would be fired from my job, or I would lose my family, whatever it is. All of those come from a sense of shame and that lie of, I'm definitely not okay as I am.
Yeah, and then that shame drives the addiction. Because if I'm walking around with a sense of being a separate self, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, how long can I live with that before I need to find something to get some relief from that? And I'm speaking of my own experience, and I'm speaking of clients that I work with, that there's a point where something outside of ourselves begins to become the solution, and then we get addicted to it, and we believe that is what is going to save us from this sense of separation. And I love what you said about being a presence, and I know that's what you do in my experience of you, and it's what my intention is to do. And what we're really doing at Foundations is really providing a space and just being a presence for people to really do the inner exploration. So I'm wondering, there's been some stories in the media recently around mental illness, or I would say mental health issues. And there's a big connection, I know, at Foundations. We're a dual diagnosis, meaning that we treat addiction and mental health issues. And there's such a connection between the two. And it's interesting that we're talking about shame, because there seems like there's so much shame still around topics like depression. And there's just some things that have happened recently in the public eye where this conversation is so present.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about depression, first of all, I think it's good to have a very clear understanding of actually what we're talking about, because there's a big difference between I feel sad, I feel blue, I feel today, and I am depressed. Depression is a clinical term used to describe a mental illness where someone is has a very low mood for a certain period of time. So that's very different than I just woke up today and I feel sad. The other thing is I think there's a common misconception, even though depression is an incredibly high rate, is diagnosed at a very, very high rate in the United States. I think generally there's still a misconception, though, that if I'm depressed, then I just need to get over it. I just need to pick myself up by my bootstraps and decide that I'm okay and have the power of positive thinking, and I'm going to be just fine. I don't need medication. I don't need to go talk to anyone about it. If I was a strong enough, good enough person, this wouldn't be an issue for me. Because, the best people it's not an issue for. It's a sign of weakness.
It's interesting too, because in that same way I can really get a sense of how much shame can drive that. Because if I have depression, a good person, see, there's that idea again, if a good person should just pull themselves up, then I must not be a good person. And then the shame and the secrecy drives that even more. And so, I mean, what would you say to someone who is not a series of being sad or a time of being sad, but really feels that they're suffering from depression? What would you say to them in terms of how they would access help for themselves?
Yeah, I like to put it in terms of this. Let's say you were out on a playground and you were either playing with your kids or you're just out on a playground on the monkey bars and you fall down and you break your arm. My guess is you'd go to the emergency room if your arm was all crooked and everything, you were in a lot of pain. You'd go to the emergency room, you would let them reset your bone, you would get a cast on, you would see a specialist if they recommended it, and you would probably take whatever medication they prescribed you. That's pretty common. Another example would be if your doctor told you you had diabetes, my guess is you would at least think about changing your diet. You would at least consider the medication that they would prescribe to you. And if you got to the point where you weren't considering that, they would end up telling you you needed to be on insulin and, going down that road. I think that people typically respond differently if we put it in that kind of very physical context. And really, depression is also a very physical illness. So what's happening in the brain, to say it very plainly, is the chemistry set in your brain is off. And it could be that you were born that way, so you had an organic predisposition for depression. It could be that you've experienced a series of events in your life where you're really upset about them and have unfinished business about it. But whatever the cause, your brain, the chemistry set in your brain is now unbalanced. And it needs to be rebalanced in order for you to be okay. So there's a tremendous amount of research out there where someone can go to a therapist, and that can be somewhat effective for depression and anxiety. It can help. It's definitely not going to hurt you. But the most effective form of treatment is to take antidepressant medication, to exercise, and to go see a therapist. That's like the whammy. Like if you really want it all guns blazing or all hands on deck, so to speak, that would be the treatment of choice. But I think that people tend to not get treatment for depression because there's, again, this idea that if I was good enough, I'd be able to kick this on my own. I'm just not trying hard enough. If I really applied myself, I would be able to feel okay. And this is just me being lazy. When really it's something that you need medical attention for, and you need someone who's a professional who knows what they're doing to help navigate you through the process. Because recovery is possible. People recover from depression every day. Every day. But just like a broken arm, you can't let it just sit there and not be attended to.
Yeah, and in some ways, I guess it could go without saying, but I think I'd like to draw the connection between depression or any other mental health issue and addiction and how they're interwoven. I know early in the recovery movement, when treatment centers first started, and I'm going to now, you're going to hear my age coming through, but I remember in the 80s, I know treatment started before the 80s, but the 80s, there was a huge surge of treatment centers that opened, and there was a separate, it was like, down the hall was mental health, and then here's treatment over here for addiction. And somewhere along the line in the 90s and, really in the 90s a lot, it began to get much more integrated, where we're looking at the relationship between mental health issues and addiction and not seeing them as separate but interconnected. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little to that, how depression or any other mental health issue might be connected to addiction.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that is actually still happening today. I think there's actually a lot of places who say they're dual diagnosis, they treat co-occurring disorders, and they do in theory, but it's really actually quite hard to do in actuality. So how it used to be, and still sometimes is you go somewhere and the people who are treating your addiction say you need to get off all your medications, you need to go and be involved in some sort of activity that's very social, whether it's 12 steps or something that's like that. And there's no such thing as relapse. You got to be abstinent forever. And I know you're sad, but you just need more time away from your drug of choice and you're going to feel better. And here's the 12 steps. And if you work them and you get a sponsor and you work really hard at it and you do your 10th step every day, you're going to feel better. And not to oversimplify that, because I definitely think there's a place for that, those teachings and that idea. And as human beings, we're not one-dimensional. Mm-hmm. We're very, very complex. And I think a lot of times it comes down to, how do you see addiction? What's your philosophy around addiction? My philosophy around addiction is not that it's the primary thing. My philosophy is that it serves a function. Mm-hmm. Someone is in tremendous pain and they're looking for a way to self-medicate and get relief. So that could be of a substance, it could be a behavior, it could be a relationship, it could be anything. And so this idea of treating the whole person, we're coming back to that now, of to be able to do and treat co-occurring disorders, you have to be able to see what is a mental illness, what is the relationship between that illness and addiction. So for example, people in my family growing up, incredibly depressed and very, very anxious. And I would say would meet the criteria for clinical depression and social anxiety. And they were using substances to try to dull that pain just enough to be able to go to work and get through their life. Yeah. And so you can say to them, oh, stop drinking. And we can come up with a behavior plan and a detox plan. And that's great. But you still need to get to that underlying thing of where's the depression coming from, what kind of treatment are they getting for that, what's going to be the action plan and the treatment plan to treat that illness. Just like going back to the broken arm thing, if you're not treating the broken arm, I broke my finger too, so you're going to cast my finger, but I still have this other broken bone that needs to be attended to. I really see mental illness and addiction kind of like that. You have to treat both. You can't just only focus on depression and ignore the fact that someone's drinking a 12-pack a day.
Yeah.
By the way, alcohol is a depressant.
Right. Yeah, and thank you for all of that. I mean, because I know that is really what we're doing at Foundations. That's why we have a psychiatrist. That's why we have medical care, and we're doing spiritual care, and we're looking at a whole person and meeting them where they're at and treating them as an individual. And absolutely, that the symptom is the addiction, not the problem. And I think that is a fundamental shift that's happened. And interestingly enough, even in 12 steps, even in the big book in AA, it says that drinking was just a symptom of the disease. So I know that we're definitely in agreement on that. And I know you're not going to believe this, but we're actually out of time.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like we just started the conversation about a couple of things. So I'm wondering if you'd come back next week.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good. Because a couple of things that came up during this, I'd love to talk about the relationship between trauma and addiction and recovery. There's several topics that came up. So thank you so much for being here, and let's continue this conversation next week.
Thank you.
So in closing, if you could take a few minutes to tell people how to contact Foundations, and also just how does someone know if they really need help, and someone that has a sense of their own, addiction or depression, and then where they can reach out and get help.
Okay. So if someone or you are struggling with feeling really sad or not being able to get through life very well right now, and you think that there's some sort of probably substance issue going on, go to our website. It's foundationsrecoverysanfrancisco.com. There's a 1-800 number there with someone there 24 hours a day that can answer your call and can help walk you through your situation and what level of care might be appropriate for you. I know at Foundation San Francisco, we do intakes for people. We do assessments at no charge. And sometimes we decide, this person isn't appropriate for our facility, but we know we have all these contacts in this area, and we know that they would be appropriate for this other place. So I would say jump online, use your smartphone, your computer, whatever, and get that information.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for being here and really engaging in this conversation about addiction and spirituality and how they're interwoven. Again, I want to invite everyone that's a viewer to come back next week as we continue this conversation about living a balanced life and the spirituality of addiction and recovery. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And for more information about Awakened Living, you can also visit us online at awakenedlivingsf.org. Thank you and good night.